I also joined Toastmasters. And at some point, I decided that I wanted to run public speaking workshops for the general public. So I did that for about 15 years in San Francisco.
So you started out, you were running the public speaking workshops for the NSP, or now it's called the NSA.
Yeah.
And the inside you want to expand.
Yeah, occasional workshops, and I was also in Toastmasters.
I got you.
So I joined Toastmasters fairly early in the game.
And then you expanded that, and you opened it up for non-stuttering folks that wanted to get.
Well, the way it happened was I was starting to do workshops in other places, and I went to Australia, and I ran a workshop in Australia. And while I was there in Perth, they said, "Hey, how would you like to run a workshop for the general public in Perth?" And I thought, Jesus, well, I've never done one of those for the general public before. So I said, sure. So I did. And it worked out pretty good. And then I did another one in, where was it? I can't remember now, but I did another one on the East Coast. And I thought, hey, I can do this. So then I started to put out, that I was going to run workshops. I got signed up at Fort Mason Center, which is where they do the stuff in San Francisco. And I got on a regular schedule, and now, I did those workshops for about 15 years.
And that was regular, like
same principles.
Was that a regular thing? Like, how often would you run those?
Oh, every 2 or 3 months I'd do one.
Okay.
3 or 4 times a year. 4 times a year, maybe.
And what were the big things? What were the big things that you focused on from the standpoint of trying to sort of coach people or train people into being better public speakers?
If you look at my book on the 10 exercises in public speaking, that's what I focused on. I would take, I wouldn't do all of them because I wouldn't have enough time, but I'd do about 3 or 4. I'd get people to double their volume. I get people to claim their space. That was a big one. I get somebody who would stand up, in front of the room and carve out about a 1.5 foot square that they would sit in and keep their arms in and keep their body in and wouldn't move out of. And I'd say, all right, I'd like to give you the rest of the room to play with. I say, so I'd like you to continue to speak, but I'd like you to walk around the room to every place that you can get to. Walk to the side of the room, lean against the post, look out the window, go to the back of the room and get a snack while you're talking to us. Lie on the floor, go out in the hall. I had people actually go out in the hall and they'd be talking from the hall and they come in on a different door.
And what was
lean against the wall?
What was the point of having them do all that stuff? Was it to loosen them up, to get them out of their tightness?
It's called claiming your space. My point was that everything that you touch, everything that you walk on, everything that you lean against becomes yours. Typically, what people do when they speak, and especially people who stutter, they carve out a gigantic 1.5 square and they stand in it like this, and they don't go out of it and they don't move around. And so all the other parts of the room are unfriendly territory, except that little 1.5 square that they're that they're standing in. So I say, claim the rest of the room. Room is yours. Have fun with it.
I gotcha.
And so they do. And it's amazing what happens when, when somebody does that. And that was just one exercise.
So the claiming the space, the doubling the volume, or the, projecting your voice. So when you only had time to say focus on 4 items, what were the other 2 that made it in the workshop?
Well, this was a 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This was an 8-hour workshop. This is an all-day workshop. If you look at the my public speaking book at the 10 exercises, you can see the kinds of things that I would do. I don't have it open right now, and I'm getting too old to think about this stuff and have it come into my mind as handily as it used to. But
I totally hear you. We'll just talk in general about the, like your philosophy on public speaking, and what is the, sort of what's the goal of it, and in general, how do you become a better one? Is it about like, how does formulation come into the equation? Like thinking before you speak, right?
Well,
I know you're into spontaneity, but obviously sometimes, like I can remember at times having almost like there were too many words at the gate, right? Like I wanted to sort of inject the whole idea straight from my head into the listener's head, but that's not how human speech works, right? You have to put one word after another and, form your story and form your point and that sort of thing. Was there anything on formulation that you focused on?
No.
Okay.
My philosophy can be summarized in one sentence. Have as much fun as possible.
I love that. I love that.
But I'm really serious about it. When you're having fun, you're being yourself. When you're being yourself, you are most in touch with all of your personal resources.
That's well said and very concise. And I think, that was one of the big transformations in my life when I was 18. And I wouldn't say I was 100% there at that point, but I took most of the steps forward, maybe 80% of the way. And then, after a few years of focusing on that idea, right? Be yourself. That was my catchphrase. When in doubt, Wilson, just be yourself, let the chips fall where they will. And like you're saying, have fun, right?
That's, what happens is that when you get caught up at an early age in a self-image that limits you. One of the stories I have in my book, which I'll tell you, I never had a bad stuttering problem, but it would show up at inconvenient moments, such as when I had to stand in front of class, talk to the same people that I was not having difficulty with talking in class casually. If I had to stand up in front of class, then I end up blocking and struggling. And so I somehow I developed an image as this being not this nice, controlled, quiet kid in my class. That was the profile that I ended up creating for myself. When I was a freshman in high school, some friends of my parents invited us to New Jersey to spend the weekend with them. They had a daughter named Barbara Lee. Haven't heard that name in years, but Barbara Lee. And so while my folks hung out with her folks, I ended up hanging out with her friends. I'd never met these kids before. But by this time I was aware that I had more to me than this kind of controlled kid that, the image that I had with my own friends. So I went out and I spent the weekend with them, and I was funny and I was loud and I was a little raucous, and I did things that I never did with my own friends. And I had a wonderful time. I had a great time. And I always remember coming back and going back to school and starting to interact with my own friends again and slipping back into the old John Harrison. And I was just aware at that time of how I had created an self-image of myself, which was risky to step out of among people who knew me. So I didn't. But among strangers who didn't know me, I had carte blanche. I could do what the hell I wanted to do. And I did. And it was very liberating, and it was very different. And that was part of what I began to see and understand about my speech and my holding back on the whole bit.
So you realize that
there was another me inside.
And you liked being that you more than the you that you had sort of.
Oh, I really liked it, but I didn't trust it among my old familiar friends because I had kind of established a profile for myself, and I was afraid to step out of it.
So this is interesting, this whole identity thing, right? Like, who are we? And I struggle to describe what this means, right? So when I came to this conclusion for myself, I'm not going to keep trying to play some game as to who somebody thinks I should be or who I think I should be. Why don't I just be myself?
Right.
If I have something that I think is worth saying, why don't I just say it? If I want to do something, as long as it's not like illegal, going to get me in a lot of trouble or something, then why don't I just do it? Unless there's obviously really bad consequences. But most of the things I was holding back on weren't bad things that I wanted to do. It was just relax and get out of my own way and live my life and, dance if you want to dance, speak if you want.
Well, that was true of me. That was true of me too. There was nothing bad that I did when I was hanging out with these strangers in, New Jersey. I was just a bigger, more expressive, more effusive version of myself, which really tapped into things that were already there, but I was not willing to let go of and reveal and express.
Mm-hmm. And so you, in our previous conversation, you had mentioned that that when you made the sort of spontaneous, very spontaneous decision to leave where you had grown up in New York and head
Yeah.
west to San Francisco. And then you moved out to San Francisco in the 1960s, which was obviously a very dynamic time out there and a lot of various forms of self-exploration going on, so to speak, and that idea of, tapping into who you really are and all that stuff, right? And so you were sort of dropped into that soup of San Francisco, if you will, at the time, the Bay Area there.
The right place at the right time.
And so, and you started being exposed, you'd already had some of those realizations before you got there, but then I'm sure you were around others that were thinking in a similar way, how to be more authentic, right? How to live a more, I don't know, sort of
fun.
Yeah, fun is this. Fun's maybe the lower level way to say, but a more profound, fun, profound.
When you're having fun, you're being most yourself. When you're being most yourself, you're more in touch. You're most in touch with your personal powers.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense to me, especially I think for folks that stutter, right? There's some people that are just fun machines from the second they pop out of the womb and they never hold back. And some of those folks maybe need to rein it in just a little bit sometimes because they might end up,
I'm sure,
being a raging alcoholic or, whatever.
Yeah.
But for a lot of folks that stutter, we're more on the other end of the spectrum, right? At least at some point in childhood, maybe when we're, 10, 11, 12 years old, you become self-conscious of it.
Right.
And, so in that case, it's about sort of us coming out of the shell and just, not being paralyzed by fear and that urge to, I don't know, deeply caring what everybody else thinks about our every move, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so you get to San Francisco and you start, having a lot of those sort of interactions, that sort of blossoming, if you will, of becoming yourself, right? Becoming you had crafted a John Harrison image that wasn't really John Harrison fully.
Well, it was a really John Harrison, but it was a very limited and constrained version of John Harrison. It was John Harrison, no question about it.
It was you. Right.
But there were all kinds of other sides of me that were not coming out. I mean, that's why I included at the end of the book my LSD experience, because that was like, if I had done LSD before I came out to San Francisco and before I had started to open up, it would have been a terrifying experience.
And can you sum up, it's very hard to put those sort of experiences into words, I think, but, and I know you wrote the article, like you said, that you included at the end of your book.
Yeah.
For the viewers, can you summarize what did you learn or what kind of, how did that experience change you, I guess?
Well, I don't know that it changed me, but it reinforced a lot of things that I was seeing about myself. My whole take on taking LSD was whatever comes up is going to be fine. Whatever I see is fine. Whatever I feel, it's fine. I'm not going to try and suppress anything that happens. That's when people have bad experiences on acid, when they try and hold back what's taking place. I said, bring it on. Bring it on, whatever happens, it's fine. I'll be interested to see what it's about. And it was very interesting to see what happened, you know. One of the things that really I struggled with in the beginning part of the LSD experience was my expectations. I got to see how my expectations limited what I was willing to experience and also shaped what I was perceiving.
So was the message there to sort of not have expectations as much, just let it?
Yeah. If
happen?
you know, I had, I mean, for example, I had read in these accounts, you know, that I had read beforehand, somebody would look at a rose, at a flower, and they would have this transcendental experience. They became the rose, and the world was roses, and they were roses. And I thought, oh yeah, I want that experience. So I was having dinner the night before at a friend's place. I said, well, by the way, you have any roses in the back? And I said, sure. I said, could I have one? And so they gave me a rose. So I was into the experience, and I was really starting to feel overcome by the LSD and, you know, and the drugs. And finally I looked at my guide and I said, bring me the rose. I wanted to, now it's time for the rose experience. So she brought me the rose and I looked at it and nothing happened. Son of a bitch. You know, I had all these expectations about what the rose was supposed to be. I didn't just go into it just to see what it was. So nothing much ever happened with the roses. But a little while later, I'll tell you, I got into a bunch of grapes like you won't believe. I mean, the world was grapes. I ate this grape. I was grapes. You were grapes. The room was grapes. Everything was grapes. I was just overcome by the grapeness of existence. But I never read anything about grapes. So I just kind of took whatever it is that came up, and that's what came up. That's the kind of thing that I discovered.
And that message about, in that case, you had the expectations of, oh, I'm going to have, maybe I'll have a unbelievable rose experience because that's what I heard about. And so you had you know, you're thinking maybe that would happen, and then
Right.
you had the grape experience instead. Is the idea with that we shouldn't assume what the future is going to bring, right? Because that's what expectations are. You're thinking about something in the future, like, oh, maybe I'll have this experience.
Yeah, you're trying to format an experience that hasn't happened yet. You're trying to set a format to experience it. But if you just go into it, see what it's about, it may be what you experience. It may not be what you it may be what you expect. It may not be what you expect. You just don't know. But you kind of take what comes up. And when you do that, you open yourself up to all kinds of new experiences.
And is that akin sort of to living in the moment, right? Like, don't assume what this future
Precisely.
might be like. Just be open to it when you get there.
Precisely. That's exactly what it is.
And obviously, when you're sitting there having the expectation of the future, that means the current moment you're in, you're not fully paying attention to, right? You're not fully open
Right
to that.
on.
Oh, when I'm at the beach next week, it's going to be so great. And
Right on. Yeah,
right, that sort of thing.
absolutely right.
And I've noticed that with movies. So when I hear it's an unbelievable movie, it hardly ever lives up to my expectation when I've heard it's just the greatest movie. But when I go in with zero expectations, into the movie, and you just sort of experience this good movie, it's like, wow, like that was amazing, right?
Exactly.
I suspect the same thing sort of happens in marriage, where people are getting married and they're like,
yeah.
oh, it's going to be a perfect utopia my whole life of pure love, and then there's challenging moments and you're like, I thought marriage was going to be so much better than this, that sort of thing. But it's interesting.
You can sum it up in 2 words: stay present.
Yeah.
Stay present.
Interestingly, I was watching, I don't know if you saw that Michael Jordan documentary last year called Last Dance. It was like a 10-part, I think it was 10, or maybe it was 6.
No, I didn't. Yeah.
It was a big Michael Jordan documentary, on his time with the Bulls. And they spent a whole segment talking about how present in the moment he was, not just when he was out on the basketball court, but, they showed him a lot like behind the scenes. He'd be walking into the gym and he's talking with this janitor, and then he's talking with this person, and then he's like noticing, oh, we painted something on the wall. That's interesting. Like seems like the guy, at least in those days, I don't know if it's any different now, but just that he's dialed into the moment. And he, they asked him in there, or maybe this was on YouTube, I saw this, an interview with him. They asked him, were you ever afraid? Like, did fear ever come into the equation when you were in those huge moments in your career, when the championship was on the line, that sort of thing? And he kind of looked at him curious. He's like, why would fear come into the equation? I was prepared. I knew what I was doing. I believed in myself. What was there to be afraid of? Right? He was just living in the moment, having fun. And, he said this so many times, like, he talks about the game of basketball. I remember all of his interview. Oh, the game of basketball, like he just loved it, right? He was truly in a joyful place. And that made it, so much easier for him to be himself, for him to be Michael Jordan.
Yeah. Well, fun is key. I talk about fun a lot in public speaking. I say, when you're having fun, you're being most yourself. When you're being most yourself, that's when you are most in touch with your personal powers and resources. So fun is central to the strategy of like being big in the moment. Somehow, a lot of us, I didn't grow up feeling like fun was the be all and end all. My parents knew what was right, things I should be doing, how to be proper, how to look good, all of the stuff. Nobody ever said, hey, you want to have more fun than you can stand? Nobody ever said that to me. They always said, hey, you want to do something. It was all about doing it right.
I hear you. And do you have kids yourself, John? I don't know if I ever did that. Okay. So, so I've got 4 between the ages of 4 and 11. And there's this saying, I don't know how old it is, but that every generation we get invaded by barbarians. They're called children.
I hadn't heard of that. That's good.
And as a parent, I think every kid is different. And some kids are just naturally completely fun loving, right? Like they are bouncing off the walls. There's no, no holding back, right? And maybe some of them need to be reined in a little bit, sort of thing. So there's a, I don't know if it's one size fits all, but and maybe there's something to be said for the way that you did it, right? Where you got that sort of discipline and, hey, John, do things proper, do it right, do it right, do it right, right? And you got that, but then you also found out how to, how to have fun, and maybe you had the best of both worlds in some sense.
Well, there's a way to correct behavior. You can do it by making the behavior wrong, or you can talk about a better way of doing it, which is more fun, or which gives you a bigger payoff in some way. Yeah,
I definitely hear you, and that's sort of the sweet spot of parenting, I would say, or of coaching, right? It's the same in sports. Sure. You want to get the most, out of your team, out of your players. You want to encourage your kids to be their best. But if you can do it in a way, well, it's like that book, was it by Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You need to set it up so that people want to do it themselves, not just they're doing it because you're, forcing them to, right? And setting up that joy is so key. And that's something, on my coaching program for folks that stutter, that I really spend a lot of time on that, wanting to get people to find that joy of playing the sport of speaking, as I like to call it, where it's not like, oh yeah, I got this stutter and I'm supposed to be working on my speech so that I can get in more control, that I know, rather than that, like,
that keeps you locked into the whole thing. What I keep saying, is when you're having fun, you're being most yourself. When you're being most yourself, that's when you are most in touch with all of your powers and resources. It's a very simple proposition.
Makes total sense, and you're more charismatic when you're doing that. You're more likely to connect with other people because they're seeing the genuine you, and it's authentic, and it's generally more entertaining and funnier and all that kind of stuff.
And you're more in touch with those aspects of you that resonate in other people too.
Mm-hmm. When you're passionate, and you look at leaders, great leaders of all stripes are generally passionate, and they're into what they're doing, and their enthusiasm is like exuding out of them, and that's infectious. It's just grabs other people. It's more captivating, all that kind of stuff.
And you don't even have to be right. Look at Donald Trump, who I can't stand, to tell you the truth. But he's very popular with a very large percentage of the people in this country. And it's because he's charismatic. It's because when he's up in front of an audience, he has fun. And people respond to that.
Charisma. Yeah. And that, and there are sort of extreme instances, I guess you could say, where there are downsides of it, but yes, there's no doubt when he's up in front of one of his crowds that's lapping up when he's throwing sort of red meat to folks that are thoroughly enjoying it, he's clearly having fun.
Sure.
In his element up there. So What would you say is so this idea that I know you're very big on, that stuttering, well, I know you have an exercise where you encourage folks that stutter to, you know, whatever book they may have laying around on stuttering, to take a page or two of that book, and everywhere where they see the word stuttering, cross it out and write in holding back. And you think that that is, and I agree with you, that that's a useful way for the person that stutters to think about what's happening when
To
we
reframe what's happening.
reframe it. So we're not seeing it as sort of a mysterious thing from another universe that drops in on us, that it's really, it's us holding back for whatever reason in that moment.
Yeah. Stuttering is the superficial behavior. You know, I mean, one of the ways I demonstrate it is to ask people to lock their hands like this. Try it with me. Lock your hands. Now, pull your hand to the right and pull equally hard to the left. Now, really pull hard. Now, while you're doing that, you're stuck in the middle because you have two forces of equal strength pulling you in opposite directions. That is a definition of a speech block. It's not very complicated, but that's the definition of every speech block I've ever heard or experienced.
So there's the two competing forces. On the one hand, we want to, you know, let's say someone just asked our name. We're like, our mind is like, hey, say your name, Mike. But on the other hand, it's like, but don't stutter, you know, like you're going to mess it up. So
no, it's not just don't stutter. It's when somebody asks your name, it's being self-assertive. It's putting out who you are. It's not, the stuttering is only what you see on the surface. That's the point.
So when, and you know, this is super common, obviously, with folks that stutter to have a tough time with their name sometimes. So
what could be more assertive than saying your name?
Right.
In a big voice. John Harrison.
Right.
As opposed to John Harrison. What comes across when I say it the second way?
That you're hesitating on saying your name. That, you know,
that there's more that comes across than just saying my name. What's coming across to me while I'm doing that is I am holding back from fully asserting who I am. John Harrison. John Harrison. Hey, screw you, John Harrison.
I hear you. And yeah, and I think that challenge in saying one's name who stutters, you know, it's obviously one reason why it's challenging is because it's awkward. Like there's pressure on you. Like what? You don't know your name? Why is this person?
You're supposed to know it, and
right.
You can't use any other name.
Right.
or you shouldn't use any other name. Some people
Right.
do.
If you're Michael Harrison, all of a sudden, well, that's weird that John Harrison said he was Michael
Right.
Harrison, right? Um, I hear you. And um, I agree with you, though, that it's more than just, the pressure of knowing your name. It's also our name in a lot of ways is our identity, right? Like that's sort of our symbol in
Right.
this
It's
world.
putting yourself out there.
Yeah. Yep.
You can't put yourself out there any more than to say your name in an assertive way. John Harrison.
Right. That's who I
Can't
am.
do it any more assertively than that.
I hear you. I hear you. And that projecting your voice thing, right? Like a speaking, not yelling at people, but not, like a shrinking violet. Oh, it's Mike Wilson. Can I maybe tell you my name? It's like Mike Wilson. Nice to meet you, man. That sort of thing.
Yeah.
I totally hear you. And so what would you say is, in your opinion, what's the biggest misconception about stuttering amongst, say, the stuttering community? I mean, I know it's a generalization to say the
Biggest
stuttering.
misconception.
Yeah.
It's a speech problem. That's the biggest misconception. It's a problem which is manifested in speech, but it is not a speech problem. And all of the scientific effort to look at speech and to see how speech, looking at the timing of the brain cells and all the things that people get into, they miss the point. The fact is, if you want to speak and you don't want to speak at the same time, you got problems.
I hear you. So it's the indecisiveness. It's are we moving forward and saying this, or are we not? Like you're caught in that no man's land, right? Where you got the two.
That's exactly right.
Equal and opposite forces, or maybe it's more than equal and opposite. Maybe it's just you choose not to say that thing, so you just give up on trying to say it,
or you back out of it, right? Which people do.
That or frantically change your words or use filler words or whatever to try to navigate the situation, not be seen as the person that stutters, sort of not have to face and it's so it's not a speech problem. It's a
holding back problem.
And obviously the majority, I don't know if I'd say the vast majority, but most people that stutter don't really stutter much at all when they're alone or when they're speaking with their dog. Right. So, and for the vast majority of folks that stutter, the more the situations where people are most likely to stutter is when they most want not to stutter. So that's
when they most want not to stutter is when they start slipping into performance mode.
Performance anxiety, if you will.
Right.
It reminds me of a friend of mine whose daughter was had a lot of potential as a figure skater when she was in her, when she was about 13 or so, and she could nail like, I forget what they call it, like the double axle, the spins and all that, and jump up and spin and land it. But if you put her in front of judges in the competition, she couldn't land it.
That's exactly analogous.
Mm. And so
Very
I
common.
think, to your point of it's not a speech problem, it's a holding back problem, or a another analogy obviously is if you drew a couple of lines, let's say, I don't know, like 2 feet apart, on the driveway, and you ask someone to walk in a straight line, not a problem, right? Stay between the lines. If you put that 2 foot walkway, say 100 feet up, right, in between a couple of skyscrapers, and suddenly it's very difficult to walk in a straight line. You're like, oh, all right, I'm not sure if I can do this, because you sense if I don't walk in a perfect straight line here, I'm going to fall off and I'm going to die. So suddenly it's difficult to just relax and walk in a straight line. Right. And so,
yep. I use that analogy in one of the things I wrote about, riding a bicycle. You have to get up, you have to stay in balance and stuff. And once you learn to ride, it's not a problem. But if you had to ride across a very, very narrow bridge that had no side rails and a 300-foot drop on either side, it would be a different matter. You'd have to manage your mind in a way that you wouldn't if you're just riding a bike.
Yeah, that's good. And so then that makes it stand to reason that, well, first of all, you have to keep putting yourself out in that situation, I think, right? I mean, obviously, I wouldn't advise anybody to go riding across a bridge that wide with 300-foot drop off, because eventually,
No, you work up to it. First of all, I mean, that's what Toastmasters is about. Programs like that, you practice it in you practice it in less stressful situations, so that you start to build confidence in your ability to function under pressure. I mean, very few people, start out functioning really well under pressure unless they're unbelievably talented or unbelievably not caring. But you build confidence by keep doing it more and more, and there's more pressure, but then you do it more and you succeed and you succeed and you succeed and you succeed. And each time it's a little harder, but you do it, and then you build confidence. That's how it is with with anything. That's why Toastmasters works, for example.
You have to keep putting yourself in that situation. You build yourself up over time. You learn, through that it's okay if you have a challenging moment, not the end of the world. Just keep going, have fun with it, and don't make it the biggest thing in the world, right? Have fun. That's it.
See, one of the things that really helped me when I came to California was a time when personal growth programs were blossoming like spring flowers here. And there was, programs like the S training and Life Spring. And, these are like 3-day weekend programs that ran you through all kinds of situations in which you had to respond as a total person, and whatever hangups you had were likely to come up, and then you got to see them and deal with them and get through them. And they helped a lot of people. They certainly helped me. I mean, I did things in those trainings that I never would have done, except I kind of worked up to them in the training. as the training went on, I, became more and more comfortable with myself. I was not comfortable with myself growing up. I had a very rigid set of boundaries within which I could function. But as an example, it was not until I was 29 years old in a kind of encounter group situation that I ever looked at another human being and blew up at him, got angry. 29 years I went without doing that. Now, if you had met me when you were younger, you wouldn't have known that about me. But I had very rigid limits as to the things that I would do that might trigger these kinds of feelings, and I always backed away from them. I had to find out what the experiences were and realize that I could live with the feelings and actually use the feelings. It took time.
And those encounter groups, like actually working with groups that were, that were doing those things. And I assume you were doing it as a group. So it was like, hey, everybody, let's do this thing that would be,
Precisely.
Yeah. And that's what we do on the Stutter with Confidence program in phase 1. We meet up, over Zoom like this. I put people in breakout rooms of 2 like this, and we have a partner, and we go out and we meet up at the malls or the shopping areas wherever there's people, and we're all, taking these steps together as a team. And, one person talks to somebody where they are, and the other person talks to somebody where they are, and we just go back and forth.
Yeah.
We say our, feared words, challenging words, and we just talk to one after another, and it blows people's minds that they can go out and do this, and then they do it, and after doing this a couple times, like a couple sessions, you're suddenly like, you feel more powerful. You're like, I can totally do that. Whereas before, you didn't know you could do it, especially as, folks that stutter, like that idea of just going out and speaking with a bunch of strangers and letting them see you stutter and looking them in the eye. The eye contact is key. Facing those reactions, desensitizing, realizing it's really not the end of civilization.
You got it.
Right. And suddenly it's a new world. It's a new universe. It's like, wait a second. I can just talk and stutter and, like I don't die. I don't go to jail. Nobody laughs me out of the room. Like it's just some speech blocks. It's not, it's not earth shattering. It's not that I'm a laughable human being. It's just a stutter. That's it. And suddenly we're not terrified of that thing anymore. And I got a message the other day after this first session that we did from one of the new trainees, where he said, I don't have my phone on me here to read it to you, but he essentially said, I was amazed to find out that with eye contact, that people would just sit there, despite the stuttering block, sit there and wait for me to finish. And then they would answer my question, quote, like I was a normal person, like I was one of them. Right. And it's like, this fellow has gone 26 years and didn't realize that you could do that. And once you do it,
there are people who go through an entire lifetime and never realize you could do that. Sad, but true.
Would you agree with Joseph Sheehan's iceberg analogy that a lot of this rests on that 80% that's below the surface of the iceberg, the shame and the embarrassment and the
How can-
all those
how
feelings
can you-
that it's going to be the,
How can you not agree with it?
how can you not, right? I agree. How can you not? Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I don't know, maybe the best analogy in the history of stuttering as to what it is, you know, and to what's the foundation, right? The foundation of the iceberg, you know, and my analogy is if you can melt that 80% of the iceberg that's below the surface. So if you're thinking of a real iceberg in the ocean, if you can get rid of that 80% of the iceberg that's below the surface of the, you know, all that shame, embarrassment, avoidance, all that kind of stuff, and replace it with courage and with, you know, the confidence to just be yourself. I'm going to say what I want to say.
Yeah.
You know, if the world's okay with it, great. If not, well, you know, that's that person's problem. But most people are going to be fine with it. Say what I want. If you can get rid of that, then the 10 to 20% above the surface, the actual stuttering gets a lot weaker and more wobbly and is much more susceptible.
The hardest thing is to get people to use the words holding back or hold back instead of stutter. Because when you talk about stuttering, you're talking about the superficial manifestations of the problem. The superficial manifestations end up being something to fear, and then the perception tends to remain on the surface. But there is a reality, a big reality under the surface, and it's the holding back conflict of wanting to talk and not wanting to talk both at the same time, which you can't do.
Reminds me, I forget what the name of the sport is, but you might be familiar. I know you spent a good bit of time in Europe, but there's a sport, I guess in the Netherlands, where you have to run and you have a pole and you have to like jump across a ditch, which is too wide to jump across without the pole. So you have to commit. You have to go. You know, you plant the pole like halfway in, and then your momentum will carry you across the ditch.
Right.
And if you hold back on that, if you don't commit,
You end up in the
go
ditch.
hard, you end up in the ditch, right?
Right. Good analogy.
And
Very good analogy.
yeah, and so like the physical approach, you know, the technique that I use, which is the deep breathing and the assertive for sound or the voice projection, as you're talking about, that's all geared towards trying to put ourselves in a physical position where we're much less likely to hold back. And then, you know, for me, John, part of my stuttering, I think, at least as a little kid, you know, because from what I've heard from my parents, I was always sort of stuttering on words when I would talk. It was like they said it was like I had 500 things to tell them. And I wanted to tell them everything at once when I was a little kid, you know, 3, 4, 5 years old. And honestly, I still sort of feel like that at 44. I'm excitable and like I want to just sort of download it right from Wilson's head into Harrison's head. So I don't have to explain it all, you know? But so almost like there's too many words at the gate, so to speak, right? Like it has to come out of the gate one word at a time. And so it's almost like there was some indecision on what I want to say first, how I want to explain this, how I want to formulate this. And so, so for me, it's also valuable to not formulate the whole thing in advance, but just think, you know, where am I taking this right now, right? Am I going to tell John about this story or that story, or am I going to make this point first? You know, so there is some sort of I feel like almost a um, almost too much excitement. I mean, I love it. I like the fact that I have that excitement in my head, but I have to, organize a little bit. So the formulating in advance, so that I at least make a decision. Okay, what words am I about to say? Right? How am I going to start with this? That lack of indecision, right? Making up, almost like in sports, right? When you get the ball in basketball and a guy's guarding you, you have choices. I can go right. I can fake right and then go left. I can fake the shot and then drive. I can fake the shot and fake that I'm going right, but then go left, or I can pass, or I can dribble left, or I can dribble, there's all sorts of choices, right? And so you can't sit there and think every one of them through before you do something. You have to react, right? But you do have choices. And so there's also an aspect of being decisive. Like, what am I going to do? And then just do it, right?
Right.
So I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yeah. Makes perfect sense.
And so for me, I actually needed a formula. Like I did need a little bit of a disciplined formula, which includes formulating right before I say it. Although sometimes as I'm talking, it's just, stream of consciousness, which is great if that's happening. But other times I need to make a decision as to, okay, what word am I going to use here? Or what, and not avoiding words because I'm, afraid of saying a word or I think I'm going to stutter, but just sort of deciding what direction. Am I going right? Am I going left? Am I shooting this? Am I passing? That sort of thing. So.
Well, when I formulate how I want to say something, I don't do it in words particularly. I do it in thoughts. If I start doing it in words, it gets in the way. I do it in thoughts. What thought do I want to communicate here? Then what do I want to say? Then what thought do I want to communicate? You do it in thoughts. If you start doing it in words, then you start getting word conscious, and that plays into the whole performance issue, I think.
Gotcha. It's interesting for me. I feel like, and I don't know if I suppose it's hard to know how many of us work the exact same in our mind, right? Because it's unique to us. But for me, I feel like sometimes I'll get an idea that just like pops into my head, but it may be like 5 paragraphs to explain that whole idea. Right? It's like a realization you then have to set up, and there's details. And so, I don't know if that's how other people think. I asked a couple of buddies of mine that are non-stuttering friends, like, how do they think? Do they think one sort of word at a time? Like, is the thought unfolding as they say it?
You can't think words.
Yeah.
You really can't. You think thoughts.
But you can only communicate it in words, whether you're writing or speaking.
Yeah, but that's done on a feeling level. That's like playing music. I mean, if you're going to read sheet music, that's one thing. But music that's improv, you just play what you feel. And you allow your mind to make the selection outside of your awareness. And if you manage it, you manage it on an emotional level, on a feeling level, but not on a precise word by word thought level. You don't do that. I mean, imagine if you were riffing in music and you were thinking of notes, specific notes that you wanted to play before you played them. You'd never do the damn thing. you have a feeling that you want to communicate, and you allow your mind to select the notes and to deliver them in the order and the way that you want to express them.
I see that. I don't play any instrument, so I can't speak from experience. But obviously, let's say you're playing a specific song, like so many bands, they write a song that's a hit,
Yeah.
play it the rest of their career for people. In that case, you are trying.
Well, that's different. Yeah, well, that's different. That's where you've written the notes down on a page, and you've memorized the order and the way that you want to play them.
Right. And let's say like somebody in sales, right? They have a sales pitch and they improve that sales pitch over time, the more they do it. But they basically have a rough script that they go by that they found works better than other things. Or like somebody giving us a speech, like, if you're, I don't know, Winston Churchill or somebody giving a speech, trying to keep your people motivated to continue to fight the Nazis, and you really want to get it. You've practiced it, you've rehearsed it, you know the exact message that you want to do. You probably want to keep it certainly spontaneous and natural seeming, but you want to stay on message, right? You want to stay focused. So
yeah,
it can be
one thing that I was never good at, and I'm still not very good at as I get older, in fact I get worse at, is memorizing stuff. To me it's just inconceivable that an actor can memorize his role in Hamlet, for example. But when he does Hamlet, if he sits there trying to remember the lines, forget it, he's not going to do very well. He has to relax and allow the lines to come up, one line, one thought, one line, pull out the next line and the next thought. That's the only way you do it. And to manage it by the emotion that he attaches to what he's saying when he's saying it. I did a lot of experimenting. I took acting classes for a while just because I was petrified of having to learn stuff. And I could memorize shorter scenes, but the time I did best, I was working with a guy whose business, he had a shop over in the Mission part of San Francisco, and he stamped T-shirts. That was his business. He was kind of a craftsperson type guy. And in class, we picked each other to work with, and we picked a scene about two old coots, two old geezers who were playing out the scene. I forget what it was now, but it was kind of funny scene. And we both thought the scene and the characters were totally funny. And I can remember going over to his shop and rehearsing the thing. And it was nothing but fun. We played out the scene and we laughed up a storm every time we got into it. And when we finally got to class, usually when I went to class, there was a certain anxiety about having to now perform the scene in front of the rest of the class. But we had so much fun doing that scene that those fears never came up. We got out in front of the group. One of us said the first line, next one followed, and we just revived the fun that we had in playing the scene. And the lines just came. We didn't have to work at it at all. And that's what's true with actors and, you know, performers of any sort.
They love it, right?
Yeah,
They get into it.
it's fun. That's why fun is so central to the whole thing. Fun is so central to recovering from, you know, stuttering and blocking. If you can make it fun, there's much less impulse to hold back.
Absolutely. It's something we focus a lot on the program, you know, and well, we call each other, you know, it's a support group. So we call each other daily. And in the case of most people, I would say, and we have conversations with our friends, and that's how we reinforce, you know, practicing our technique, but it's just having the joy of conversations and learning that speaking is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be enjoyable. And in the meantime, while you're having that fun, of course, you're practicing. Your conversation skills are getting better. Your listening skill, you know, all those things are improving. Your formulation skills, your everything. The more you do something, right, the better you get. And if you're having fun, then you're motivated to continue doing it. And it doesn't, that's one of the keys, I think, is to make it so that it doesn't feel like work. It doesn't feel like drudgery. And then it's just easy to, put in the time and effort.
So it's something that you want to do as opposed to have to do.
Yeah. I get to do it. I have this opportunity to have a conversation with a friend of mine here, you know, and it's fun. And it's, you know, and if you do that, it becomes so much more sustainable than, you know, I got to be doing this because I'm working on my speech so I don't stutter as much, you know, all that stuff is just, it's so demotivating as compared to, this is a part of my lifestyle.
I think so.
I thoroughly enjoy.
But then again, I'm prejudiced.
Well, look, I think you look around, right? Michael Jordan loved the sport of basketball. LeBron James loves the sport of basketball. Tiger Woods, you know, from the time he was 3 years old, right, had a golf club in his hand and you know, was out there just working on his game. He didn't know he was working on his game. He was just having a grand time hitting the golf ball around when he was 3 years old. He was, you know. And you know, as I remember when I was deciding what I wanted to do when I grew up, when I was early in college and having a conversation with my dad, and he was like, "Well, Michael, have you thought about maybe going to dental school?" And I was like, "Well, so when my dad was, you know, saying, 'Hey, have you thought about going to dental school?' And one of my responses was, 'Well, Dad, I don't like the sciences really, other than astronomy. I don't like the sciences at all, you know.'" And he's like, well, and I said, "And I'm not really naturally interested in the sciences." And he said, "Well, Michael, you know, interest can be a choice." I said, "Really? Huh, that's interesting." And so I then decided to go to dental school, mainly because I wanted to work, you know, 4 days a week and be my own boss and live where I wanted and, you know, make a solid living and not have to sell people on things, just sort of tell them what they needed and they could, I could help them or not, their call. But the more I got into the sciences over the years, and by the time I was halfway through dental school, after taking a bunch of science, I realized, actually now I am interested in the sciences.
Yeah.
And one time a few years ago, I was in a library and I walked past an organic chemistry book and I picked it up and ended up sitting there reading it for like 40 minutes. And I never would have thought I would have done that in a billion years. But once you can actually generate interest, like the world is interesting, period. Everything is interesting if we allow ourselves to sort of be immersed in it, right? And to learn it, to open ourselves up to it, rather than going back to your thing about expectations, rather than thinking, oh no, chemistry's boring. I know it's boring. Everybody knows it's boring, rather than that, but actually opening yourself up to it and be like, no, it's a whole universe of molecules and atoms and, power struggles. And it's what, the whole universe is revolving around physics and chemistry, in a way. So, it's actually fascinating when you open yourself up to it. So this and the reason I bring this up is this speech journey, we can get interested. We can learn to love the sport of speaking if we immerse ourselves, if we become a student of the game. And something else, luckily for folks that stutter. So for people that don't stutter, they get no joy out of, say, going to Starbucks, being able to say their name when the teller asks their name. It's a non-event, right? It's a non-event. Yeah. Get no joy out of it. For a person that stutters, when you know the other side, when you know what it's like to not be able to say your name or to not be able to, articulate an idea. And has this been your experience, John, after fearing speaking when you were younger? I mean, would you say you just permanently for the rest of your life enjoy conversation and speaking and being able to express yourself more perhaps than you would have if you never would have experienced that fear of speaking and all that?
Well, not necessarily at this stage of the game. I like connecting with people. It's what I like to do. I don't know that I like it more because I couldn't. Certainly there was a real contrast when I started to be able to do it more. But I like people. I like interacting with people. I find it stimulating. I find it fun. I find it emotionally satisfying. Brings out my playful side. I like the feeling of connection. I like everything about it.
Likewise. I think great conversations and connecting with other people and, learning from them and them learning from you, all that stuff.
I like the intimacy of it, especially when people are willing to speak about things other than formal subjects. I like sharing experiences, sharing personal thoughts. I like it all.
Ideas, right? Just
Ideas,
like we talked about yesterday, it's a good conversation with somebody is we become more than just ourselves, right? We're two minds going down the same path here, sort of exploring this idea together.
Yeah.
As they say.
Yeah. I like discovering new things, and in a stimulating conversation, you end up making connections with things that you hadn't connected before. And it's like, oh wow, that's interesting. I like that.
That sense of being an explorer, right? In a sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the sense of discovery.
I hear you. And you're absolutely right with conversation. A good conversation, even if you've talked about these things many times, and even maybe with this same person. You've talked about the same subject with the same person, but you're now diving into it again. You just stumble across new territory. You haven't thought about it exactly in those terms, right? Like a little crevice, of the, and, maybe nobody's ever thought about it in exactly those terms. Who knows? It's like the well is bottomless as far as the number of ways that you can circle certain issues.
I mean, we'll probably talk again. And when we talk again, we'll talk about whatever's coming up then,
Mhm. Exactly. Well,
how it goes.
yeah. Well, John, speaking of that, it's been great talking to you here, man, as always. And
Yeah.
you are, one of the legends in the stuttering world. You've influenced
Oh, God.
a lot of people. I know that for a fact. And, your book, Redefining Stuttering is a great read and a very valuable contribution, I think, into this whole thing. So,
Well, if people find it helpful, then I feel that my efforts were well served.
absolutely, they do. I know for a fact, and always super interesting to talk to you. And let's do it again soon.
Anytime.
Nice talking to
One
you.
thing I have is time. Let me tell you, God knows. Oh, Jesus.
You're all vaccinated now, though, right? So you
Yeah.
don't have to worry much.
I've yet to go. I've yet to leave the house in the last 14 months.
Gotcha. And how has that been? Like, have you, was it a period of adjustment and now you're adjusted, or?
Well, I had to adjust. I mean, I don't get around very well. Until a couple of years ago, I was driving my wife around, and then I was loading her wheelchair in the back of the car, and I ended up overdoing it, and I fractured a vertebrae in my back. So I spent most of the time in a electric wheelchair now. That's because it's not easy to walk.
Oh,
But I get around. We live on only one floor of our house.
I gotcha. Well, that's another advantage. We were talking about that, the fun of conversations, right? And speaking to people. And, that's a cool thing. I mean, you're obviously, as folks get older and things get more challenging physically, you can't do as much on that front, but you can still have conversations, right? And so that joy is still there, which is awesome.
I'll tell you what's a sobering thought. I'm almost twice as old as you are.
I'm 44. Yeah. So you're 86, you said? Gotcha. No, you're still going strong. You're still sharp as a tack, which is awesome. That's something a lot of people obviously.
Well, still chugging along.
Well, we hope you're
to keep my body in shape.
Absolutely. If you can get it moving as much as you can, that obviously helps.
Right.
State the obvious, but fantastic speaking with you, John. We'll talk soon.
All right. Yeah, Mike. It was terrific.
Likewise.
Anytime, you know where I am, and I have all the time in the world.
I hear you. Sounds good, man. Enjoy and
okay. Until the next time. It's been great.
Bye.